Let's talk about hyperfocusing for a sec. So, within the last couple of months, I've worked with a few people, and I've noticed that quite a bit of people have questions about hyperfocusing. There's some people in the ADHD community who perhaps are just coming in and becoming informed that they have ADHD that might not be aware of what hyperfocusing is. So, I want to do a video to entail and give a couple of details as to what comes with hyperfocusing. It can be a gift and it can also be a curse, as the cliche says. So, let's dive into it and let's do some learning. So, hyperfocusing. What is hyperfocusing? Hyperfocusing is thought to be an intense focus, fixation on an activity or interest for an extended period of time. Many report it feels like being in the zone. So I'm sure a lot of us with the condition have found ourselves hyperfocusing. Some of us might be aware that we're hyperfocusing, and some of us perhaps are not. While we're hyperfocusing, we're just in the zone. We're really focusing on what we're doing. We might not be aware of what's going on around us. We might not be aware that time exists. We're just fixated on the idea. And if we don't put ourselves on check, we could perhaps mess our schedule up, miss details and deadlines and all the other lovely things people with the condition have trouble with. So the reason why I want to make this video is to give people with the condition some helping tools to kind of keep themselves on check, because hyperfocusing, especially long hours into the night, can be quite difficult. So let's look at the neurochemistry first, shall we? Dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter in the brain that deals with motivation and concentration. People with ADHD have low levels of this neurotransmitter, which gives us difficulty with both motivation and concentration. Having low levels of dopamine also causes distractibility. This makes it difficult to sustain attention into tasks that are not stimulating to the ADHD brain. It also makes it difficult to change from one task to another, especially if it's an unstimulating, i.e. boring, task. So, yeah. It's quite hard, because sometimes in order to get our work done, we have to hyperfocus. We have to get into that zone of but the issue of hyperfocusing is we can't just get into hyperfocusing sometimes. I'm sure some people with the condition can and have their ways and have crafted and perfected and refined perhaps a way to do it. I know I have tried, so I'm sure other people out there have tried as well, but not everyone, I assume, can do that, can go into hyperfocusing on a blink of an eye, snap of a finger, whatever you will. So, there's ways and manners of which we can control that, and we have to control that. As much fun or as good as it feels to hyperfocus sometimes, we cannot let that affect our lives, so much so that night after night we lose sleep, or we have bad quality sleep perhaps because of this. We can also neglect other areas as well. So, it's a little bit about the neurochemistry. The lack of dopamine brings with itself quite a bit of problems when you have ADHD. Moving on, let's delve into the needed essentials. These are things that I highly recommend that you get if you have trouble. Scratch that. I recommend anybody and everybody with a condition get these things. If you're already organized, if you already kind of have your system going, well, then good for you. This might not be something too bad to try out, though. These needed essentials I'm about to tell you. So, here are the needed essentials. Ones I recommend. And these things I recommend are recommended from ADHD seminars and articles I have seen. So I wanted to give some of these things out, some of the advice out in terms of these needed essentials for those who wish to help themselves out. Because it seems to me, from what some people have told me that I've worked with, particularly the inattentive types, that keeping your hyperfocusing on check is troubling, can be troubling. So what can we do to help ourselves out with this? So I'm going to give you a couple of essentials, and I want you to perhaps think about getting some of these. And if you feel inspired and feel that might be of some help, then I encourage you to go out and get them. They have been of help to people I've worked with the condition, and they might be of help to you. Never know. So, item numero uno, a visual clock with numbers and hands, not a digital clock. So, a visual clock, classic elementary school round clock with the hands that point to the different numbers, etc., etc. You guys know what I'm talking about. So, the reason why that's recommended is because when you have ADHD, there comes an issue with perception of time. And while we're working, we might not be able to see or grasp the concept of time while we're working. And for those people who are looking at me like, well, I can just look at my phone, look at the computer, the time's right there. Yeah, that's the digital clock. I know you can make it into an analog clock too, and if you can do that, go right ahead. Save yourself some time. But the point is, for you to have a visual clock in front of you that has these spatial recognitions, meaning that you can look and be aware of the spatial recognitions from the hands of the clock, that'll help you internally and cognitively sort of feel the time and plan the time out better. There's something introspective and sort of visual about that stimulates the ADHD brain to kind of move along, so to speak, and kind of keeps us grounded in terms of time. This, from what I've seen in certain pieces of research I've seen, is due to just the visualization of seeing the numbers and how long it's going to take for time to pass, so to speak. Seeing time, sort of making it physical by seeing it in clock form, can be helpful for a lot of us. So that's just one suggestion. And if you can get it, and you can get a classic analog clock and get that onto the computer, which I'm sure you can these days, then yeah, by all means do it. The point is, you want to have a clock in front of you with the stinking numbers, not the digital clock that just tells you, oh, it's like 7:30 p.m. right now. No, you want to see the other numbers all at once. Get fancy, get an aesthetically pleasing clock as well. Have fun with it, folks. So if you need to get it, and if you don't, then don't. So that's item number one. Needed essential number two, a visual calendar to write down appointments, deadlines, and other important events and activities. Now, having a visual calendar right in front of you in your workspace. By the way, these needed essentials I would recommend to have in your workspace area, whether it be at home or work, whatever it is, even both. If you have that clock in front of you, it'll help you stay on check. If you have the calendar to write down your appointments, deadlines, and other events and activities, you can see them every day. It'll keep them on your mind. A lot of us with ADHD have trouble remembering a lot of the appointments, deadlines, and other important events and activities we have to do. Out of sight, out of mind seems to be a lot of the issues that come along with ADHD and remembering to do stuff as well. So we need to see the visual stimuli, i.e. the marked writing that on this day, this week, I have to go here, or I have to go there, or this thing has to get done by this point. That's going to help you. It's going to help you keep yourself on check and remind you of these things that you perhaps have missed in the past. And it'll help you not miss it again, hopefully. So, take some effort, take some practice. But it's a system you can develop that will greatly help you out. Item number 3, a board of some sort where you can write down the goals/necessities of the day, month, and or year. An inspirational tidbit would be quite helpful as well, something that inspires you. What I mean by that is perhaps a quote of some sort. So, right next to the clock, the analog clock that you're going to have in front of you, if you have it on the wall somewhere in your workspace area, you're going to have next to that a calendar with the appointments, deadlines, and other important shenanigans you have going on during the month. And then next to that bad boy, you're going to have yourself a board. Any sort of board where you can write yourself reminders. There's stores here in the U.S. like Michael's. I don't know if Joann's has gone under or not, but that's another arts and crafts store. You can also go to Office Max. Go to Amazon. There's so many options. So a board where you can write down, perhaps not the things you have to do or the things you put down on the calendar, but perhaps other sort of things, like things of importance or of great importance of that day that need perhaps more space in writing. I know that has been really inspirational and helpful for quite a bit of few people that I've worked with, including myself. Seeing the goals I have to do, not only for the calendar, but also for the day, can be quite inspiring and can help me stay on check so I don't start hyper-focusing on, I don't know, working on ADHD content, for example, and then I'm like, oh crap, it's already 4 in the morning and I gotta wake up really early, and then there goes your day. You wake up, you've only had 4 hours of sleep, you're already in a bad mood. So it's helpful. In that board as well, you can also write time and duration of how long you would like to spend on something, and even write down a little schedule for the day, schedule for the week, and then put some inspirational quote. I know not everyone likes the quotes, but something that helps you uplift yourself and that can motivate you, and hopefully that's something positive. So, go get yourself something nice. Treat yourself. There's a lot of stuff on Amazon you can get for that. At a decent price, too, for those of you who don't want to spend a lot of money. So, needed, essential, number 4, treat yourself to something nice. When you make progress and start completing more goals than before, treat yourself to something. And something that's going to benefit you too. I don't want you to go and, just go ham and get like 40 chicken nuggets or something. No. Something that's going to help you out. Perhaps something healthy, perhaps something fun, and something to help uplift you. You know yourself more than I do. Go ahead. Treat yourself to something nice. When you complete more goals throughout the week, like for me, it can be something small, like getting myself, ice cream or something. A good flavor that I wouldn't normally get, or going to a restaurant at the end of the week and then getting myself a little something extra I wouldn't usually do. That's how I feel like I treat myself when I do something solid or complete a goal I want to do. So, also, in terms of behavior psychology, that's positive stimuli. That's going to help reinforce your behavior that you're trying to implement, i.e. the behavior of making yourself disciplined in these respects. And if you give yourself a little treat or a little reward because of it, it's going to help enable conditioning, which is going to inspire you to keep wanting to do it, which is ideal, hopefully. And you can modify them, to your own necessities and needs and your own individuality. So, moving along. Point number 1, sleep issues. This causes people to stay awake late into the night, oftentimes not being aware of how many hours they have been hyperfocusing. Because of this, people lose sleep. Having little and or poor quality sleep when you have ADHD can negatively affect the levels of your neurotransmitters and overall negatively affect your life. So, while we hyperfocus, a lot of us with ADHD have trouble going to sleep for various reasons, various neurochemistry correlated reasons, and also some stuff during the day. So, at night, when there's less distraction, less noise, less people coming and interrupting, we've got a majority of our work done, perhaps. A lot of us like to work deep into the night because there's less distractions. So while we're working, sometimes we hyperfocus without really knowing it. We're so into the hyperfocusing that time just flies by, and then sometimes day after day, week after week, month after month, we have low quality sleep, which is going to negatively impact your reward system, i.e., dopamine and serotonin. It's also going to affect other neurotransmitters as well. Studies have shown people that get low quality sleep and sleep late into the night have a much more negative affect, meaning that there are higher correlations of depression, i.e. negative feeling. So you want to do yourself a favor, especially if you have ADHD, because the lack of sleep for a lot of us with ADHD, not all of us, but a lot of us with ADHD, can really hamper our mood and decision making and can negatively affect the next day dramatically. So we got to pay attention to our sleep, and we got to take care of it. So how do we do that? Here's a remedy, an offering of sorts. If you plan on hyperfocusing on something later in the evening, set a time limit for how long you're going to allow yourself to hyperfocus for. If it's for 3 hours, for example, put an alarm on your phone, your computer, your laptop, your gigapet, whatever you got, for the 2 hour and 45 minute mark to be notified / aware and can mentally prepare yourself to stop hyperfocusing. You're essentially giving yourself a little 15-minute window. Kind of like, okay, I got to stop hyperfocusing now. I got 15 minutes to enjoy the rest of this hyperfocusing, and then you got to stop. Which I know can be kind of hard for some people, considering that once they stop hyperfocusing, it can be very difficult to get back in. But bear with me. So, moving along, I recommend for you to stop the hyperfocusing activity at a positive or conclusive point during the hyperfocusing activity. This way, it makes it easier to gradually stop hyperfocusing rather than stopping hyperfocusing abruptly, which can feel very uncomfortable and can be rather difficult. The goal and time duration can be written on the board discussed earlier. Remember that board with the shenanigans on it that we spoke about just a couple of minutes ago? Yeah, right there. That would be a good place to write down how many hours you're going to allow yourself to hyperfocus, you know? And if you really want to keep yourself strict, you can put some core TV thing like, how many minutes have you hyperfocused today? And have like a finger pointing at you or something. I don't know. Make it fun, folks. Keeping yourself disciplined and on check, you know, it doesn't always have to be this very miserable activity. No, it can be fun. It can be funny. It can be humorous. You know? At least for me, that's how I keep myself on check. So some of you might want to do that too. Anyway, moving along. Factor number 2 here, neglecting eating because of hyperfocusing. Regardless of how good hyperfocusing feels, we need to make an effort to have a solid meal and not skip that. Lack of food and nourishment brings forth many issues of ADHD and can negatively impact decision-making and judgment. I'm sure a lot of us have been hyperfocusing on something and we have skipped 1, 2, 3 multiple meals because of the hours of hyperfocusing on something. Because some people hyperfocus during the day. It doesn't have to be at night. Some people have the luxury of being able to hyperfocus at various times throughout the day. So, unfortunately, while we're hyperfocusing, we can be neglecting eating as well and our nourishment, which when you have ADHD, lack of nourishment, yeah, there's going to be quite a bit of problems in terms of mood, perhaps decision-making, and you know how you carry yourself, perhaps. So we need to make sure to keep our eating on check. What's the remedy for that? Plan and organize when you're going to eat, and try to stick to those plans. Make adjustments if necessary. If you're planning on hyperfocusing, please make sure to schedule time to eat something during the whole ordeal, either before, during, or afterwards. Eating is very important because what ends up happening is if you don't eat, the stimulation you're getting from the hyperfocusing, your brain is going to perceive that as nourishment of sort because you're picking up your reward system and you're really getting a neurochemistry fix, so to speak, from this hyperfocusing. So basically your brain's like, okay, I guess this hyperfocusing activity is going to replace all, you know, a bunch of other essential activities, so here we go. So we got to be careful because of that, because if we don't eat and we're hyperfocusing, guess what? It becomes a bit harder, or quite harder for some of us, to get out of hyperfocusing. The next time you haven't eaten something and you're hungry and you start hyperfocusing on something, see how long it takes you to get out of the hyperfocusing. And if you have a problem with that, set yourself a timer of some sort and just keep yourself on check. Just because eating is very important and you don't want to mismanage decision-making in your life or, you know, disregard other important factors that you got going on just because you haven't eaten. So make sure to take care of yourself and consider your nourishment because it's of importance. Factor number 3, missing deadlines and other important events. Some people with ADHD hyperfocus on things frequently. And due to the lack of perception of time during hyperfocusing, we might miss events, deadlines, meetings, assignments, etc., etc. This can happen to both children and adults. Children often hyperfocus with video games, television, etc. So, like I was saying before, sometimes while we're hyperfocusing, we perhaps need to write down an appointment or something we got coming up. But since we're hyperfocusing, the importance of everything else kind of goes out the window. Since we're not perceiving time, we're not really perceiving, hey, our grasp of reality really is slipping us right now. And time is moving along, and I'm not really aware that I have a deadline coming up. And then what happens? Boom. Deadline sneaks up and past. The deadline sneaks up and it passes you by just because you were hyperfocusing. And perhaps you made it a mission to be aware of that thing, but hyperfocusing can really take you off your game. So we need to be careful because of that. We also need to be careful in terms of limiting the amount of time we let our kids spend on the phone, and also with video games and television. I don't want to sound, old school here, but there's a lot of parents and people that I've seen and some that I've worked with that they just let the phone raise the kid, essentially. The parent has little to no input sometimes in the activities of the child. So a lot of the time, parents with the condition have so much going on and so much stress that it's just kind of like, here, just give the kid the phone. I just need to get some relief time to myself. So we need to organize our life here. We need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves so we can take care of those around us that really need us, especially if you're a parent. So the phone and video games, and TV should not be the end-all, be-all. It starts with the family. You need to put emphasis and effort into helping your child out in different areas that they need, especially if they have the condition. I have other videos that talk about factors of ADHD and the implications it brings throughout school. So, and particularly also about the inattentive types. So if you want to check it out, I got some videos on the channel as well. So what's a remedy for missing these deadlines and other important events, as we were talking? Remedy would be, in order to help ourselves stop missing deadlines and important events, we need to oftentimes be reminded of what we need or should be working on. This is why I recommend having a board of some sort in your workspace area, so you can frequently keep yourself on check to be doing what you need to do and to manage your time more efficiently. So on this board I'm talking about, it can be a whiteboard, and they sell small ones all over the place. And if you really want to go full budget style, Walmart's got some really cheap ones too. So, and if you're one of those people that needs like different colors, to inspire you, like, different markers, go for it. Get creative. Put the really important stuff in red. Put the more passive stuff perhaps in a different color. Make yourself a color key of importance. Make the importance events perhaps a red or orange color, since they stand out a bit more. And make other more neutral events perhaps, blue, green, or something. You choose the colors, and if you do that, it'll help you out. It'll help you out with missing deadlines and other important events, because you'll have them visually there as indicators that, hey, I need to be working on something. Okay, I'm going to allow myself this much time. Granted, these things are not going to be the end-all, be-all. What's going to determine the success rate with this? It's the individual and how much effort they put into it. So a lot of the time when we got ADHD, there's issues with being consistent when it comes to a remedy or a regimen or a discipline that we're trying to implement in. So we don't need to always take everything at once. You can always take certain things step by step and make it at your pace. As long as you're moving forward as long as your goals are starting to be fulfilled, that's okay. That's your pace. But you need to do something about it. Regardless of whether you got other people depending on you or not, you owe it to yourself. Having ADHD makes life hard, but sometimes our negligence of certain things, especially tools and different sorts of things that can help us out, we neglect that sometimes. And sometimes it can be because of the condition itself. So if you haven't got yourself evaluated for ADHD, I highly recommend that you go see your local psychiatrist and local psychologist and get yourself evaluated. And if you decide to seek medication and treatment, I highly recommend supplements as well. Because supplements and the medication taken together will help your brain in terms of helping out a fuller scope of the neurotransmitters and the neurochemistry issues that a lot of us with ADHD have. So I have a video on supplements and neurochemistry and the neurotransmitters people with ADHD have lower levels of, and what we can do to help out those lower neurotransmitters. So I hope this video was of some education and of some help, especially for those of you with ADHD that have trouble with hyperfocusing. If any of you would like to share any sort of interesting moments of yourself hyperfocusing, perhaps deep into the night, or something you missed, or any sort of comical, loving, any sort of story that would be inspirational to the ADHD community, go for it and leave a comment below. It'd be interesting to see the different sorts of episodes and events a lot of us with ADHD have had because of hyperfocusing. I know I have my fair share of shenanigans that have gone down because of me hyperfocusing on something. So let's share it up, and that's it for today, folks. Take it easy and keep that ADHD under control. Y'all coming back now, you hear? But